the Ticats Audio Network. This is the CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil.
1,415 days later, the Elks hand their fans a gift, but will it be a gift that keeps on giving? Can anyone contain Chad Kelly and the Argos' growing fan base? Hey, the Butler did it in BC. And folks, what is your favorite Labor Day memory? Let's have some fun. The CFL This Week kicks off on the Ticats Audio Network. I'm your host, Bubba O'Neil. Thanks for being a part of the best weekly CFL chat in the business. Now, here to inform, entertain, and give their opinions are these men. Folks, he was one of the best at his position, and he's maintained that same quality at TSN as a game analyst. Duane Ford, we certainly appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You know, this fella has also made the smooth transition from the football field to the broadcast booth from TSN Radio in Montreal. Bonjour, Marc-O, Brouillette.
Hey, what's going on?
And folks, he is well known for covering that Winnipeg sports scene, which seemingly is so easy with the Blue Bombers from the Free Press. Great to have you, Taylor Allen.
Thanks. I wish I had the playing resume as Marc-O and Duane, but at least I got the writing thing going for me, I guess.
There's nothing wrong with being one of us media guys. Come on now.
You know, all right. With the playing resume comes the sore joints, too. So I think you may be winning on this one.
Fair point.
Yeah, there's no ice tub for us there, Taylor. All right, guys, here it is. The Elks' long losing streak is over, Duane. Now, this is back-to-back victories. Are they a team to be feared with in the second half?
Yeah, fear might be a little bit of a strong word, but I certainly think that respected is it would be fair. They've proven themselves to be obviously a team that can compete. Trey Ford has made a difference for them at quarterback. I think has given them, in 3 games, I don't necessarily want to call it stability, but I think what he's given them is confidence and belief that I think that the team was losing a little bit before. And you know, that's by no means a shot at Taylor Cornelius. I think a tough situation for him that I think that his own confidence was broken, and I think that was starting to be reflected in the rest of the team. But there's no question there's some talent there. It doesn't hurt when you get Geno Lewis back at the same time either. And so, you know, getting a couple of key pieces like that into your lineup certainly makes you a much more competitive team than they demonstrated in the first half of the season. But the confidence piece is huge to me, guys.
Taylor, it wasn't a win, but all of a sudden you could maybe see a change in the franchise and their approach, their offense, playing the Bombers, and then they ended up losing. But do you see some improvement in this team and someone that could maybe threaten maybe even Calgary for a playoff spot in the West?
Yeah, I do for sure. And that's kind of the beauty of the CFL, where you can start the season, 0-9, and you're technically still not out of it yet. But you know what? Good for Edmonton, right? I mean, I was at the game the Bombers played in Edmonton a couple weeks ago, and just there was no atmosphere at the game, right? Like the fans they were embarrassed of their team and the product and whatnot. But now with Trey Ford, what he's doing now, winning 2 games in a row, there's something to talk about with this team. So it's gonna be interesting to see what they do in the coming weeks here. But yeah, I think it's safe to say, though, that Trey Ford might be the most exciting player in the league right now, which is a great thing for the CFL in general and, of course, Edmonton.
Marc, are your thoughts?
You know, I don't know if I would describe them as feared. I think I would instead use the word dangerous. I know Chris Jones. I know that he's not afraid to make personnel moves. And with the season that this franchise has been having, these guys are playing for jobs. I've been in those locker rooms. I've had to endure some losing seasons. And when you start getting into those fall months and it becomes clear that, you might still have an outside shot at the playoffs, or you may be completely ruled out, those guys start playing for jobs. And sometimes that's the fire that a guy needs lit under his behind, to kick things into gear and get going. And so depending what happens over these next couple of weeks, we could see some guys going out there playing for jobs in fear that they may end up on the street, whether before the end of the season or early in the offseason.
Duane, a lot of the talk was this hashtag free Trey Ford, and that was kind of going around the league. What is it about this young man that impresses you?
Obviously, the fact that he's learned, he's developed. We knew that there was going to be a learning curve, and I know this is certainly something Marc-O could speak to as a former U Sports quarterback. That, you know, there's a big jump in terms of the speed of the game and some of the things that you're being asked to process. And so when we go back to where he got, I would say, rushed into action in the opening game against BC in 2022 to now, you see a much more composed guy, a guy I think with a greater understanding and sense of all that's going on around him. So that's one of the big things. But for him as a player, obviously the thing that just jumps off the page at you is his athleticism, his explosiveness. There have been tons of athletic guys that have played quarterback in this league, but there haven't necessarily been a lot that you would label as explosive as Trey Ford. If you were to line up all the quarterbacks in the history of the Canadian Football League on the goal line and tell them that they're going to have a race over 40 yards, Trey Ford just might win that race. And that's saying something when you look at some of the all-time runners. But he's that kind of athlete. So you combine that with a guy who, I think he was 83%, 15 of 18, throwing the ball in his last game, that becomes a scary combination when he presents those kind of issues with both his legs and his arm.
Taylor, all of a sudden, these back-to-back meetings over Labor Day against the Calgary Stampeders, if you're the Stampeders, it's red alert.
No, absolutely. And Trey Ford, we all knew that he was going to be a good athlete, right? Like that's been the story of him since he, arrived on the scene, basically. But what's impressed me the most is, just his decision making with the ball. Like he's making all the throws too. Like he's not just a guy that could run. He's not just a short yardage quarterback. Like this is a guy who can play in the CFL. And we saw it last year with Nathan Rourke, a Canadian, doing what he did. And now it's no longer out of the norm to see Canadians playing at this high level at that position, which I think is just obviously fantastic for the CFL.
Guys, when you take a look at this, I think from a structural standpoint of the football game in all three aspects, it is amazing to show or to see that when you get, Marc-O, consistency on offense, all of a sudden that Elks defense that was so criticized, all of a sudden they start to look really good because they're not on the field all the time.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, when you can count on your offense to go out there and put some points on the board and put you in some favorable positions and not feel like you're playing with your back against the wall every time you step out on the field, it allows you to loosen up a little bit, play with a little bit more of that swagger, play it a little looser, a little faster, a little more aggressive. And that's something that the Elks defense will be able to benefit from with the way the offense has improved over the last couple of weeks. And to go back to Trey Ford specifically, I think we have to mention that I think what we're seeing is the product of an improvement in the level of competition and coaching at the U Sports level, that we now have guys that, especially at the quarterback position, so early in their professional careers, are able to step onto the field and have success. And, there's a lot that goes into it. You talk about a lot of private coaching as well. We mentioned Nathan Rourke. We all know that he works during the offseason with a private quarterback coach. A lot of these Canadian quarterbacks seem to be investing more time in resources in developing themselves outside of the structure of their respective university teams, because they now realize that it's actually feasible. It's a reality that they may get a shot at the next level at playing quarterback, which was not the case a couple of short years ago.
To Marc-O's point there, Duane, I think of a name, and I know you're the big Western alum, I think of a name by the name of Hillock. And he looks like he could be a real good one.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of guys in Canadian university football right now, as Marc-O said, guys that have done things along the way on their own in terms of their development. I think that even at the U Sports level, I think that one of the things that you're starting to see is more dedicated quarterback coaches, as opposed to quarterbacks who are being coached by the offensive coordinator, or don't really have a position coach per se, that they're actually getting specific quarterback skill training that a generation ago wasn't the case for quarterbacks at Canadian universities. And so, Evan Hillock is a guy who's been successful at Western and is one of those names. certainly that you'll hear mentioned. LOL Latondres Regimbald at McGill is another guy, certainly the U Sports Rookie of the Year a year ago. Terrific player at the CEGEP level, and now doing the same thing in U Sports will be another one to keep an eye on. A couple of Canadian quarterbacks still south of the border at D1 schools as well that we'll be watching over the next few years. But yeah, for the U Sports guys in particular, I love the doors that are being opened by Trey Ford and the success that he's having.
Can I just ask you, Marc-O, on this, because you could speak to this? The fact that Trey made it no secret that he wasn't going to play safety, he wasn't going to be a DB, he wasn't going to be a wide receiver, and he was pretty vocal with that. With the improvement of the Canadian quarterbacks being Canadian and being a quarterback, can these guys, is Trey set the stage for others right now to say, I'm not going to be something else, I want to be a quarterback?
Well, you know what? I think that's a very subjective question, and it should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. You have some guys like myself who are ready to do anything for the opportunity to play professional football, whether that was, under center, on the defensive side of the ball, as a receiver. It didn't matter. I was just looking for that opportunity. But it's pretty impressive what Trey Ford did. He stuck to his guns. He believed in himself, and he put it out there that that's what he wanted to do. Now, do I expect every other quarterback that's eventually going to come out in the CFL draft to take that stance, right out of the gate and say, hey, if you're going to draft me or if you're going to take a shot on me, I only intend on playing quarterback? No, but at the same time, it's a decision that's left to everyone, and if that's the route they choose to go, so be it. Hopefully, they can back it up. And so far, despite it only being a small sample size, it does appear as though Trey Ford is backing up what he said a couple of years prior.
All right, let's switch it up, guys. The Hamilton Tiger Cats went into Vancouver, and let's be honest, they shocked the Lions. James Butler was unbelievable in that game, coming out of the backfield and, of course, running the football. Taylor, I'll throw this to you. The Tiger Cats have shown an ability, because I believe Butler is leading the league in rushing. Can you be a rushing team in the Canadian Football League and be successful?
Hamilton better hope so, because I think that's really their only hope right now. I mean, we're on the Ticats audio network, so I should be careful with my words here, but I mean, they've been so disappointing this year. There were such high expectations for this team heading into this year, and I know Bo got hurt and whatnot, but it's been a mess, right? And like you said, they shocked the world by beating the Lions, especially coming off of a week where they just lost to Edmonton. But, I mean, the good news is, James Butler, he's playing really well. I mean, if you want a silver lining for sure. I think it was week 7 and 8, he was getting bottled up pretty good. He was only averaging 2 yards per carry in these and he has 2 games in a row now with over 100 yards. And he's averaging over 5.5 yards per carry these last couple of games as well. So keep giving that guy the rock, because until they kind of can get some better play at quarterback, or that's probably that's kind of their best bet. So, but in all honesty, though, do I think you can be a contender by just leaning on the run? Not so much. I think it's been proven, especially these past couple of years. You look at the teams that have won the Grey Cup, Toronto last year and Winnipeg, obviously a couple of years before that you need both. You can't just be a one-dimensional offense. So it's going to be an uphill climb for Hamilton for sure.
Duane, can you have that balance? I mean, I think when the run sets up the pass, especially when your quarterback is a young QB.
Yeah, that's the thing. You've got to be able to build off of it and develop some of your pass game based on the run, whether it's play action, bootleg, any of those sorts of things that allow you to move the pocket around and create some misdirection for the defense. But I think what's going to be interesting just in terms of maybe the consistency of what they do is I'll be watching for that bigger sample size, as the BC game was Scott Milanovich's first game as the offensive coordinator. And I think that it was hard for BC to anticipate what they were going to see, quite frankly. They were probably preparing somewhat for what Hamilton's offense had been through the first part of the season under Tommy Condell, probably preparing a little bit for things that they had seen Scott Milanovich do in the past. And I think they got a little bit of maybe some new wrinkles that Scott Milanovich has added to the package. So as time goes on and teams have a little bit more of a library of film, they're going to have to be able to adapt, and not to say that running the ball may not be front and center for them. I look at the success that Calgary has had for a number of years as a team that's been pretty good at running the football. And so I think it's going to be a matter of what's their next move in the chess match, because I think teams are going to adapt to them running the ball.
And that's the thing about Milanovich, Marc-O, is that his success, I mean, it's well documented. And a lot of it is short passing and running the football. And I guess this could continue for the Tiger Cats, again, as they continue to develop a young quarterback.
Yeah, and I think historically, if you go back, the Hamilton Ticats over the past couple of years have never really used their tailback in the traditional sense where they were going to turn around and hand the football off to them. They like to have guys who can motion out of the backfield, run routes in space. I mean, they would often opt to throw screens or quick passes and consider those runs in their offense as opposed to simply handing the football off to their tailback. And yeah, Butler carried the football 18 times last week, which is a pretty big number for a Ticats offense. But when you look at the stats, I mean, he's tied for the lead, for the team lead with 39 receptions. And now obviously this was pre-Scott Milanovich. But I expect Scott to work with the personnel that he has, work to their strengths and continue doing what they do, and to have the ability to get James Butler out in space, get him matched up against some linebackers out in the open field where they're not going to have any help and they got to be able to flip their hips. That can create a lot of trouble for opposing defenses. And, I got an opportunity to see Scott work firsthand. He was the offensive coordinator when I first arrived in Montreal in 2010, and obviously I faced him on several occasions while he was with the Argos organization. And so I anticipate that he's going to work to the strength of his guys, all the while trying to manage his young quarterback, in Taylor Powell, who's seen some ups and downs after being thrust into action with injuries to not only Bo Levi Mitchell, but also to backup Matthew Schultz.
Folks, you got to apologize, and I've said this to you guys. They are actually removing my balcony at this point right now. It is a lot of noise, but regardless. Taylor, we talk about winning, and we talk about losing, and how losing can continue losing. Maybe winning can breed some winning for the Hamilton Tiger Cats as well.
It could, but I mean, you look at their next 4 games, they're playing Toronto twice and Winnipeg once, so that's as tough as a schedule as there probably is right now. So we'll see. We're going to learn a lot about this team in the coming weeks. Scott Milanovich, he's only, taken the OC job for a couple weeks now. So we'll see how this offense continues to evolve and get better week after week. But yeah, in 4 weeks from now, I know I kind of bashed Hamilton already, but in 4 weeks from now, I might even have some more harsh words to say, considering how this next month goes. But we shall see.
Well, we shall see is the Toronto Argonauts. And Duane, right now, they are being led by Chad Kelly, the quarterback. I think we were kind of leaning on Zach Collaros in the early part of the season as the favorite to repeat his MOP. I guess that would be 3 in a row. Has Chad Kelly stolen that honor from him, even though we are at the midway part of the season?
Well, before I answer that, I first want to say that I don't want to sit anywhere near Taylor in the press box when the Bombers come to Hamilton, because I just think that might be a dangerous place to be. I might be at risk of getting hit by projectiles. But
well, I'm going to be in Hamilton next month, so there's your warning. So
I'll say hi to you from a distance. I will wave from a distance.
Fair, I'll take that.
But no, as far as the MOP race, I don't think it's necessarily been stolen yet. Zach is still Zach, and he's having himself a pretty good year. Vernon Adams has been terrific as well out on the West Coast, despite the Lions' recent struggles in terms of wins and losses. But Chad Kelly is a remarkable story. I think, all expected him to be a capable starting quarterback, but not necessarily, even given his pedigree, given his resume, not necessarily an outstanding starting quarterback as he has been so far in his first year. He deserves a lot of credit for being a hard worker, first of all, but also being humble in terms of coming up here and learning the Canadian game. Often, I think one of the impediments to success for players coming from big American programs or guys who have experienced success south of the border is sometimes thinking that it's going to be easy up here. And obviously, Chad Kelly came in here with a different attitude, and I think he's learned the game, and I think that's allowed him to play with some confidence, with some aggressiveness. Ryan Dinwiddie and the offensive staff have continued to put him in good spots. And yeah, there's no question that Chad Kelly has been one of the stories, and no doubt a clear front runner in the East as far as that MOP race, at least.
Marc-O, when you look at him offensively and defensively, now if you're trying to defend him, what's so difficult with him in terms of containing him? He's running the ball effectively, and he's putting up 300-yard games like it's coming out of style, like not a style. Like what's difficult in terms of defending him?
You know what I think it is? I think he's just a tremendous competitor. Now, he obviously doesn't have the athleticism and measurables of a guy like Trey Ford, yet he finds a way to extend plays, to make off-balance throws in tight coverage, stuff that, you usually expect to see out of a veteran quarterback. But here he is doing it with such limited CFL experience. And I've got to admit that I had my doubts coming into this season as to whether he was going to be able to live up to the expectations, because in my personal opinion, I mean, you look at his track record, there were a lot of off-the-field issues when he was in college. There was a very small sample size of actual in-game play, with McLeod Bethel-Thompson having been the starter in Toronto for so many years. And obviously I wasn't privy to what that organization was seeing in practice in the meeting rooms, but it just kind of seemed like Chad Kelly before the start of the season was being anointed as the next huge thing in the CFL. And so I was a little skeptical, but I must admit that a little past midway through the season, he's proven me wrong. And I'm very impressed with his leadership skills, especially with his young age and his limited, CFL experience, as I mentioned. But I go back to what I said before. I think that he has those intangibles that a quarterback needs to be successful. He goes out there, he competes from start to finish, and he kind of straddles that line of playing on the edge of, he's not too cocky to the point where it might backfire on him and get in his head and he starts, playing mind games with himself. But he's just kind of plays with that edge that sometimes you need. And I think it also helps that he's surrounded by a pretty darn good football team in the Toronto Argonauts.
And I think that's a great point, Marc-O, that they are a really good team. And Taylor, they could be a team to be feared with as they get better down the season. I am concerned with the fact that they don't have any bye weeks left, and that could be an issue as we get a little bit later into the season when it comes to injuries and that kind of thing. But to a bigger picture right now, and I know the commissioner, Randy Ambrosie, is also always talking about strength in the big city markets. In that last game against Calgary, there was a little atmosphere at BMO Field and seats were being filled. So maybe a guy like Chad Kelly, as we said earlier, can sell seats.
Totally. And I think, if we're being honest, I think Chad kind of rubbed some people the wrong way, in the offseason, just some of the claims that he's making, the expectations that he kind of had for himself, because we've seen that time and time again, right? These guys from down south who have these very impressive college resumes or had a cup of coffee in the NFL, they think they're going to come to the CFL and they're going to dominate, and 99 times out of 100, they don't, right? But Chad, you know, to his credit, he's backed up what everything that he has said. I mean, you look at the season that they're having; they've not lost a game where he has, you know, played the full game. The only loss was the game in Calgary that he left early. And all the games that he has played fully, they're averaging 38 points per game. Like, you can't ask for any more from your quarterback than that. So he's been a great story. He has a personality to him too and stuff. And I think in a market like Toronto, especially, you kind of need a guy with some charisma and stuff like that too. Like, that stuff's important when it comes to selling tickets to the casual fan and whatnot. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see though, because if he does win MLP, I think he'd be the first year starting quarterback to win that award since 1990, since Casey Printers did it back in 2004. So it's just something you don't see very often. So he's been incredible to watch this year.
You know, Duane, obviously you're in the television game right now, and we love to build storylines in television. I think big smile there. TSN can't help but kind of align on this right now. I mean, this is a selling point for the league.
Yeah, it definitely is. There are obviously the Kelly family shots in the stands every game, and this is one of the things. I mean, for me, living in Southern Ontario, I'm sure you experience the same thing, Bubba. Is sometimes this mentality, particularly from Toronto, of their being so enamored by the NFL and particularly by the Buffalo Bills, who are sort of an hour and a half drive away, that historically I have shaken my head at the people who would drive past the old Sky Dome, Rogers Centre in Toronto, where the Argos would play, where they could have watched Doug Flutie in 1996 and 97, to go and watch him from 1998 on the other side of the border in Buffalo. Like, you had this guy right in front of you and you didn't come out. But there is that mentality sometimes. And I do think that in Toronto, the Kelly name, and obviously the connection to Jim Kelly, who had those great years with the Buffalo Bills, Super Bowls aside, that means something to the Toronto fans. It's a selling feature to the Toronto fans. And the fact that, you know, as the guys have talked about, that Chad Kelly has sort of, unlike many before him, has lived up to his advanced billing.
Let's go to a different topic here, Marc-O. Nathan Rourke obviously made the CFL proud last year. There's no doubt about it. He was an outstanding player, and he became, as we talked about with Duane, a great storyline for everyone in this league to follow. Now he goes over to the Jacksonville Jaguars, puts together, I thought, outstanding numbers playing in all three preseason games, yet he gets cut. Marc-O, was that a surprise to you that the Jacksonville Jaguars released, or at least cut, and put him on waivers?
Well, I think on the surface, obviously it was a bit of a surprise, especially considering the success that he had last year in BC and the way that he played in the preseason. But when you begin to peel back the layers, what the casual fan needs to understand is that throughout the evaluation process within an organization, they don't just base it off of the preseason numbers and the stat lines and the highlight plays, that everybody saw rolling over and over on SportsCenter. They evaluate everything from the day you walk in at training camp, in the meeting room, the way you conduct yourself. Every little thing is taken into consideration. And this is not to say that Nathan Rourke did anything wrong off of the field. But at the end of the day, I think the Jacksonville Jaguars made a decision that they felt was in the best interest of their franchise. And they were willing to take the risk to put him on waivers with perhaps the opportunity of coming back and scooping him up and stashing him on the practice roster. But that being said, I don't think this is the end of Nathan Rourke's NFL journey by any means. And whether he gets picked up on waivers here in the next couple of days, if he goes back to the Jags in a practice roster capacity, or if he even just, sits at home for a little bit and sees how things play out across the league in the next couple of weeks. But obviously, I was disappointed. I was rooting for him, as were, I think, a lot of other people across the country. But I have no doubt that he's going to land on his feet, and then he'll likely get another opportunity here in the near future future, whether that's in Jacksonville or somewhere else in the NFL.
Taylor, it's interesting. There's so many Canadian fans out there that are saying, my goodness, Nathan Rourke has to be better than CJ Beathard.
They do. But I mean, being a backup quarterback they don't just look for a guy who has, the higher ceiling and whatnot. Like, a backup quarterback's job is to be there for the starter as well, right? Help them prepare and whatnot. And CJ Beathard, no, he's not the flashiest guy in the league by any stretch of the imagination, but he's a 6-year veteran. He's heading into his 3rd year in Jacksonville. Trevor Lawrence is the guy. They drafted him 1st overall. He was the highest touted quarterback prospect possibly since Peyton Manning. Like he's on that pedestal, right? So Nathan had an uphill climb ahead of him. I think he kind of just has to pay his dues a little bit. I've heard, lots of people say, well, Washington, they stink at quarterback, or this team stinks at quarterback. They should go get Nathan Rourke and whatnot. But it's not that simple. So I think he just needs to kind of pay his dues a little bit. I know he probably doesn't want to sit on the practice roster for a year and whatnot, but that might be kind of where this is going. But let's not forget, though, he worked out for 12 NFL teams. It wasn't like Jacksonville's the only one that had any interest in him. So there's still going to be a market for him. He just kind of has to go through the process a little bit first.
Well, Duane, the obvious market, because you can't help but be excited in some ways. There was some excitement in some ways from Canadian Football League fans thinking Nathan's coming back to the CFL. Do you envision a situation where that happens?
Definitely not this year. As Marc-O said, I don't think we are seeing anything close to the end of Nathan Rourke's NFL journey. He's going to have an opportunity, whether it's Jacksonville, whether it's elsewhere, right? As Taylor said, he worked out for a number of teams, was signed to Jacksonville with guaranteed money, that there's a degree of commitment there that really spoke to the level of interest and at least the level of competition for his services. And so whether the opportunity comes immediately or a little bit down the road, I think it's going to be worthwhile for Nathan Rourke to stay down there and continue to explore that. I think we also need to bear in mind some parts of the financial picture, that his practice roster salary, while by NFL standards is by no means big money, but you've got to remember he was playing on the salary of a CFL rookie Canadian for his first couple of years in the league. So yes, he would be due for a big raise should he choose to come back to the Canadian Football League. But what he's going to get in the National Football League, whether on an active roster or a practice roster, is considerably more than he's been willing to play football for to this point. So I think that he's a guy who's patient. He's a guy who's willing to play the long game and sees the big picture very well. And I think for Nathan Rourke, from a career point of view, for him, that means waiting to see what happens in the National Football League, at least for the 2023 season.
Duane, right back to you on this one, because I know there's a lot of people out there that don't understand. What is it? What are the requirements of being on a practice roster in the National Football League? What are your responsibilities?
Well, your responsibilities really are basically the same as being on the active roster in terms of what's expected from your level of preparation and your time commitment, other than basically game day is going to be a little bit different, right? And travel days and things like that you're not a part of. But in terms of the practice week, your level of commitment is every bit that of the starters, and I would say often more, because you're trying to advance, whereas veteran starters, I don't want to call it complacency, but there's going to be a level of security there for some of them. And so, yeah, as a young guy, as a new guy, and especially at that position, you're going to be expected to put in a little bit of extra work if you want to move forward.
Marc-O, did you spend any time on a practice roster in your days?
No, I was fortunate enough to make the active roster from week one, and obviously I got put on the injured list a couple of times, but never down on the practice roster. But I've obviously had several teammates who have gone through it, and even throughout one season, they'll play a couple of games, then they'll be demoted to the practice roster, and it can play a lot on a guy's psyche and his commitment. Sometimes it's a lot to digest. It's a lot to have to process when you think, you've made it and you just dress for a couple of games in a row and you've had some success. And then all of a sudden, overnight, things change, the roster changed, and now you're back on PR. You're making PR money. You're trying to figure out what your housing's going to look like. Your salary changes overnight. So it's definitely a tough deal. But as Duane alluded to, I think the circumstances are a little different in the NFL. I think Nathan Rourke could benefit from spending some time on an NFL practice roster. And I don't think we can lose sight of the fact that, it was, the odds were stacked against him to make an active roster right out of the gate. I mean, it's different when you talk about a position, for example, like wide receiver or defensive line, where they're, keeping a lot of bodies around on the roster. Some guys may make the team because they can play special teams, and so that allows them to make it onto that active roster. But when NFL teams are only carrying 2 active quarterbacks and perhaps one on the practice roster, it can be tough to crack the lineup. And so, I don't think Nathan Rourke has any reason to be discouraged. I think more opportunities will come, and I don't doubt that he'll be given a fair shake here over the next couple of months.
Guys, we're approaching the week in the Canadian Football League that everyone talks about. Well, the CFL season doesn't start until Labor Day. That's where everything gets going. Taylor, obviously there's a good little relationship with the Bombers and the Rough Riders, so much that I guess it was Troy Westwood said some words, and then there was something called the Banjo Bowl, which followed the Labor Day Classic, I believe, if that's how that goes. What is it about Labor Day that is so special? And do you have any special memories of that actual date or a game?
Oh man, people in this town go absolutely nuts for Labor Day weekend and of course the Banjo Bowl as well. It's probably the closest thing we have to kind of like that college football, like intense kind of rivalry type of thing. I remember growing up that, Labor Day, there'd always be a party to go to watch the game on someone's big screen or a projector or something like that. Whether you're at the lake or in the city or people organizing bus tours to go down to Regina and stuff like that. And then, of course, the Banjo Bowl is, I always tell people, I don't care if you're a football fan or not, go to that game. You're going to have a great time just seeing all the costumes and stuff everyone's wearing, the banjo music that they play throughout the whole game and stuff. It is a really fun atmosphere. That is the CFL at its best. But for me, I don't know if I have a favorite memory. Just thinking of that weekend in general, or these 2 weeks in general, just kind of brings up a lot of kind of happy thoughts, I guess, and good memories in general. But I think one that kind of maybe stands out is 2016, because before it seemed like this Labor Day game was basically like an automatic loss for the Bombers, basically for every year. Right? Like they just would go to Regina and it felt like they had no chance at winning that game. But in 2016, that was kind of a sign that, maybe this organization is kind of turning things around a bit. That was the one where Justin Medlock, he hit a 43-yarder as time expired, I believe, to give Winnipeg a 28-25 victory. So that one meant a lot to the Winnipeg fan base. But yeah, I think at least half of these games, the Labor Day games, they've been decided in the final 3 minutes between Winnipeg and Saskatchewan. So it's always a good game, no matter which team you're supporting. So I'm sure this one will be another one too, especially with Saskatchewan coming off of a bye. So they've had a whole week to prepare for the Bombers. So should be interesting to see.
Marc-O, you lived this out as a player and now as a broadcaster, and I think people would first say, well, what is the rivalry between BC and Montreal? And I don't know if it is a rivalry. You could probably tell us more, but I also think to a long period of time, BC and the Alouettes were the best teams in the league.
Yeah, obviously, it's unfortunate that the Als don't quite have that historic rivalry like the Bombers and Riders do on Labor Day. But obviously, Montreal and Vancouver, BC Lions have had their fair share of battles over the years. BC historically has been a very good football team, Montreal as well. And so for these guys, I don't think they need any extra motivation motivation going into this week's game, especially coming off that big loss against the Bombers last week in Winnipeg. But personally, I consider myself quite fortunate to have had the opportunity as a player to experience the Labor Day Classic and the Banjo Bowl in 2018 when I was with the Riders, and the fact that, we were able to win both of those football games. Mosaic Stadium is a special place to play, period. But you add that little touch of Labor Day Classic to it. It makes it even more special. And I'm thankful for having had the opportunity and very grateful for having had the opportunity to have been a part of that when I was in Saskatchewan in 2018.
Duane, kind of like what we have in the East Division, there's the Toronto, and then there's the Hamilton, and there's all the sort of mixes that go on there, the sort of Toronto fan, Hamilton fan, Hamilton versus Toronto, if you know what I'm saying. And it's at Ivor Stadium for all those years, and now Tim Hortons Field, and that was a rough place for the Argonauts to say. And I'll say that as a media member and a fan. Like, it was hard for the Argonauts to come into old Ivor Stadium. They got roughed up pretty good, and you know this to be true. You lived the same thing though in an interprovincial battle between Calgary and Edmonton. How hostile was it?
It's I'm not sure that it's necessarily the same level of hostility in the stands as there is in Southern Ontario, quite honestly. I mean, the thing that I'll say about the Argos Tiger Cats rivalry is I grew up in a family of Toronto Argonauts season ticket holders. And so I grew up at Exhibition Stadium at games all the time. Now, my parents always went to the Labor Day game in Hamilton. They never took my brother and I to Hamilton when we were kids. And I never really thought about it until years later, because I actually played my first ever CFL game in Hamilton, and I thought it's so weird that I've never been in this stadium. But when I saw some of the things that went on in Labor Day, I realized why my parents never took their kids there on that day or for that game. Is that, we could get into a whole show about the crazy things that happened there. But it's as much as in Southern Ontario, in the CFL, fans are cheering against each other in the CFL, but tend to cheer for the same teams in virtually every other sport, right? People in Hamilton are cheering for the Toronto Raptors and are cheering for the Toronto Maple Leafs and cheering for the Toronto Blue Jays because they're the closest team. It's funny how just polarizing the CFL rivalry is. Yet in Southern Alberta, where they literally are cheering against each other in every possible sport, the rivalry is intense, but I don't necessarily find the in-stadium temperature or climate to be quite as hostile on Labor Day.
What about as a player, Duane, when you would face those then Eskimos? I mean, I guess the temperature was a little higher there too.
There was definitely a vibe in the stadium when you talk about just the buzz, the excitement of the day the Labor Day game, or games when you consider the back-to-back that used to be a Monday, Friday, that the buzz in the stadium was a little different, that it did feel like a big game. A lot of the times it was your first afternoon game, your first daytime game of the year, and kind of signifying the second half of the season and the start of this stretch run, and the fact that, yes, it was always against the provincial rival. It was always a pretty cool day to be in the stadium, that's for sure.
So that leads us into the games this week, guys. I'll throw it open to all three of you guys right now. Of course, Lions at Alouettes, Bombers at Rough Riders, Argonauts at Tiger Cats, and then the Elks at Stampeders. Taylor, the game of the week is...
If I don't say Bombers and Riders, I'll be banished from Winnipeg. So I got to go with that one. But yeah, like I said before, though, I mean, I know the Bombers have won 5 straight. They're 9-2, sitting in first place in the West and whatnot. But don't forget about Saskatchewan. They've shown some flashes, and like I said, they're coming off of a bye week as well. We've seen how important that could be, especially this season. So yeah, I think that one's gonna go down to the wire.
Well, hopefully Zach doesn't throw 2 interceptions, 2 pick sixes in the first half. I mean, that could set you up for a real tough comeback for the Bombers, especially playing in hostile territory. Marc-O, your thoughts? The game of the week is?
Well, selfishly, I need to pick the BC Montreal game, and I'll tell you why. Because earlier this season, the Als went into a similar stretch where they lost 3 in a row, and they lost those games to Winnipeg, BC, and Toronto. After that, they went on a 4-game winning streak, and then all of a sudden, we saw them start climbing those power rankings, and everybody's starting to wonder, well, hey, are they for real? Are they actually a good football team? They're coming off of 3 losses. They're stringing together 4 wins. What is the identity of this team? And now they find themselves in a very similar portion of their schedule where they were in Winnipeg last week. They've got BC this week, and then they've got Toronto back-to-back. Now, they're 0-1 in those 4 games with the big loss against Winnipeg. So I think this is a true measuring stick for the Alouettes to see what kind of football team this is. Are they for real? Can they beat the good teams in the CFL? Or are they only able to go get their wins against the Ottawas and the Calgarys of this league? And so that's why I think this is a crucial game for this football team, especially going into these colder fall months as we approach the playoffs.
Well, Duane, unlike our other 2 guests, you have no allegiance any longer. You have no fans that were going to attack you like Taylor and Marc-O. So who are you liking this week? Which game?
Yeah, it's funny because I came into this prepared to go with the BC Montreal game, but Marc-O stole my pick. But very similar reasoning. Yeah, that you have a BC team that I don't know if you would say might have shown a couple of cracks in recent weeks, and a Montreal team that's had that win streak recently, that in a league that's been divided, kind of a, top 3, bottom couple, and a bunch of teams fighting in the middle, that Montreal is one of those teams trying to prove that they belong with the Torontos, Winnipegs, and BCs, and an opportunity to demonstrate that. And obviously Vernon Adams being back in Montreal creates some interest there. But Marc-O picked that game, so I'm going to pick the Battle of Alberta, Calgary versus Edmonton. Similar reasoning, though. When you talk about playoff picture, you've got an Edmonton team that now has some momentum. Calgary is the team, as Taylor alluded to. People kind of seem to be overlooking Saskatchewan a little bit, but everybody keeps mentioning, Edmonton maybe going after Calgary and taking away a playoff spot from them if they're able to continue that momentum. And so 2 teams that are pretty hungry, that are both kind of one fighting to keep momentum, one fighting to turn its momentum around, and potential playoff implications when you look down the road on this one and season series and so on. And so I think there's plenty of reason to be excited about that game. And we mentioned earlier in the show the excitement that Trey Ford has brought, and then you kind of balance that as well with the excitement that the Calgary offense provided in that loss against Toronto, that gives plenty of reason to be excited about this matchup.
Duane, right? That's a great point that you just brought up there. The explosion of offense that they showed at BMO Field against the Argonauts, and that was like 39-36, 39-33 loss, or whatever that was. That was so close. Was that the real Calgary offense that we saw? I mean, it had been struggling. I guess Jake Mayer hadn't thrown a touchdown pass in 4 games. Is this more like it, I think, for Dave Dickinson's crew?
Well, I think Dave and Jake certainly hope so, but this is, this one comes with a to be determined label that we talked about a little bit during the broadcast, that I'm sure as for fans of the Calgary Stampeders, there was a level of excitement in watching what they did offensively in that game, but probably also a level of frustration in asking the question, why can't it be like this all the time? And so I think what you're looking for from Calgary is to prove that, yes, what we saw against a very good Toronto team is in fact the real Calgary Stampeder offense, and they'll have an opportunity to try and demonstrate that in back-to-back games against Chris Jones and the Edmonton Elks.
Well, folks, nothing left but the games to be played, and we certainly appreciate our fine trio here that have joined us on the CFL this week to express their opinions, their thoughts about the hot topics of the league. And as always, I know we get lots of response from our listeners, viewers, and Taylor, if people want to talk to you about the Bombers and a little bit more, and maybe some of our angry Tiger Cat fans have some words for you, how do they contact you?
Well, they can find me on Twitter or X or whatever the heck it's being called today at Taylor Allen 31. And of course, they can, if they really want to help, they can subscribe to the Winnipeg Free Press and enjoy our great CFL coverage. But also just wanted to mention, though, there is some breaking news. Nathan Rourke just went unclaimed on waivers, and he's expected to sign with Jacksonville's practice squad team. So there was some late breaking news for the show, but yeah, that's where you could find me.
The CFL this week. That's why we have you guys. Fantastic. Great to update our people on that situation. And great news for Nathan as well, too. Marc-O, where do we find you?
Also, M.O. Brouillette on all platforms. And if you're ever at Percival Molson Stadium, we're up in the press box on the north side of the stadium. Our window's always open, whether it's raining, snowing. We're always there. Feel free to walk on up and have a quick chat in between commercial breaks.
Are the hot dogs really that good?
I couldn't tell you. I've been vegan for almost 8 years now, so... Unless they're serving vegan hot dogs that I'm not aware about, unfortunately, I can't provide any guidance with regard to those.
I heard those LaFleur hot dogs are pretty good that they serve, for crying out loud. Duane, I'm not quite sure. Are you on social media? Are you hiding?
I'm on it, but I tend not to actively participate in social media for a variety of reasons. So if anybody wants to know what I have to say, you got to just watch the games.
There you go. Thank you so much. Hey, guys, again. Sorry?
I was just say, if you want to complain about Duane, just write to the CRTC. Send a strongly worded letter to Bell Media. It'll eventually make its way to him.
Yeah, exactly.
Spectacular stuff. Thank you again so much for joining us. And of course, hey, to you CFL fans and listeners, we'd love to hear from you. Whether you're listening or watching on YouTube, drop us that message. Give us a review, 5 stars. It's always great. We appreciate it. We love putting out the content for you. And as I always like to say, hey, this is not the only show here on the Ticats Audio Network. We have some outstanding programming that not only focuses on the Ticats first, but also the CFL. And of course, we got the Morelli and Hit Show, which is probably leading the ratings right now, because those two are something else if you know them personally or even when you remember them on the football field. But we appreciate it, folks. Labor Day, it's always a classic time to enjoy the Canadian Football League wherever you are across the country. Enjoy the football. This has been the CFL This Week. I'm your host, Bubba O'Neil, and you've been listening on the Ticats Audio Network.